Nelly Custis's harpsichord was absolutely unique and probably is the only one in existence today that we can hear in exactly the way that it was intended. It's got some very special characteristics, including what I would call special effects. One is a machine stop, which instead of the usual way we change our sounds by hand stops on harpsichords, this one can actually give us 4 different preset sounds by means of a pedal. So it's very, very different from most of the harpsichords that I've had the opportunity to play. The other thing that's very unique to this instrument is the fact that it's got all leather plectra. That means that instead of quills that were made from bird quill, this is all made from leather. So the sound you hear from the strings means it's being plucked by leather. That allows us to be slightly more sensitive with our fingers and maybe create phrases in a different way than we normally could with bird quill. And the third really special thing about this instrument is the Venetian swell. Harpsichords cannot usually make a crescendo. The way a wind instrument can, the way a bowed string instrument can. But this one, because it has the louvers that open and close by means of a pedal, we can actually make a real crescendo. So that's extremely unusual. John Watson is really the most important figure in this reproduction, because what he did was he studied the original harpsichord that was in the mansion, and he was able to understand the materials and the measurements and the nature of this very special instrument and then reproduce it so that we can actually hear its sound today. Sometimes we think that the harpsichord was on its way out and the piano was on its way in and eclipsed it, but that didn't happen immediately. In fact, in many parlors of the time in the late 18th century, you might see both a piano and a harpsichord, as you would in the Washington household. This kind of harpsichord that Nelly had was very orchestral. It had so many different contrasts and so much opportunity to change its sound that it actually could do more than the piano could at the time. The harpsichord arrived in the Washington household in 1793. So this was already a time when you might think the piano was the main parlor instrument, but in fact, harpsichords were very much in use. And if we look at catalogs of the time, most of the pieces say for harpsichord or piano. When I get to the harpsichord to start playing it, the first thing I'm going to do is open the lid, and then I'm going to prop it up with the stick. And with this instrument, I have a choice. I could either open the whole thing, which means that the Venetian swell louvers will go up as well, and I'll prop those up so as to hear the whole full voice of the harpsichord. Or if I would like to use the Venetian swell, I'll leave that down, and then I'm able to use it with the pedal mechanism and create the crescendos and decrescendos that as they were intended for this instrument. The music desk has a kind of a nice story because John Watson was able to copy this original instrument so beautifully and so perfectly, but apparently it did not have its original music desk from what I understand. And because he was the conservator and the curator of musical instruments at Williamsburg, he was able to identify a music desk that would have been perfect for this harpsichord, and in fact it fit exactly. And so he copied that one. I tend to love it because it's very, very adjustable, and it also has locking mechanisms that makes it very stable. And I like that because it holds the music very securely. And it's the best music desk I've ever used. It's one of the best harpsichords too, but it's very nice that it has this practical touch to hold our music. The upper and lower manuals, a lot of times I get asked what's the difference between the two. The upper manual plucks a set of strings a little bit closer to the player. so that the sound is slightly more pungent. It has different overtones. And the lower manual plucks a little bit differently along the string, a little further away from the player, so that the sound is a little bit more mellow. A little more fundamental, if you want to think about the partials. So that we have two slightly different sounds from the lower and the upper. And these can be played separately, or they can be played together. Tuning the harpsichord is a little bit like tuning a violin, but instead of 4 strings, you have 183. 3 ranks of strings, and there are 5 octaves. So you actually see 61 keys, and each one has the opportunity to play 1 or more of the 3 strings. On this harpsichord, starting from the left, when you're looking at the name board, at the beautiful flowered inlay, you'll see stops that change the sounds on this instrument. The first one you see is the harp stop. Sometimes you'll hear that called the buff stop, and that's because a little piece of leather is pressing against the string inside the harpsichord. So when we turn it, that means the sound is actually being muted, and it has a very delicate sound, very beautiful sound of that muted string. The second stop that you see on the left is called the lute stop. And the lute is actually a whole separate row of plectra that pluck very close to the bridge, closer to the player, and that creates a very nasal sound that has a very distinctive quality. The third stop on the left is the octave. Very often you'll hear this called the forefoot using organ terminology, but here it's noted as the octave. And that's because when that is activated, you're going to hear a string sounding 1 octave above what you might expect. So if you expect a middle C, you're going to hear an octave above that tone. On the right, you also have 3 stops. The first one is actually a fake, because when you look at it, it's beautifully balanced, and you have 3 white knobs on the left and 3 white knobs on the right. But the first one on the right does not do anything. It's there just for symmetrical beauty and balance. And the second one is called the first unison. Those are the strings that are played on the upper manual, and those are plucked closer to the player. And the last stop you see is the second unison, and that would be the stop that is plucked a little bit more towards the center of the string, away from the player. Any of these stops can be joined together, so you can play the first and second unison together. You can play the first unison with the octave, and you can play all 3 together, and we would call that the full voice of the harpsichord. Playing this harpsichord makes me feel like I'm in the parlor of the Washington family, because this harpsichord allows us to hear probably as close to the sound of the original that we're ever going to get to. So we can imagine this is what the Washington family heard when Nelly played her harpsichord.
Click the subscribe button below and the bell icon to get notifications for new videos about George Washington and behind-the-scenes work at Mount Vernon.